time, the escalators were running. Again, I was assuming some new version of the game had been released. I moved the character forward and began the ascent to the second floor of the mall. As I reached the top, I noticed that there weren't any shops on either side of the floor. The walls were completely bare, stretching on forever in both directions. I started walking for a while and found it incredibly boring. There was literally nothing. It got to the point where I could not see an end behind or in front of me. Even when I tried to turn around and retrace my steps, the escalator was nowhere to be found. I was trapped in this never-ending hallway. I closed out of the game and decided I would look it up on Google later. I was probably doing something wrong. Maybe the second floor had an exit where I could finally get past the man in the suit. On the next lab day at school, I decided to test a different approach. As soon as I clicked on the icon, I received a message saying, "Welcome back, Josh." I stared at the screen for a minute and wondered how it possibly could know my name. I was only 9, but old enough to know that my home and school computers were not connected, and I had not created any kind of account for it to remember my name. As strange as this was, I forgot about it in about 5 seconds because I began the game in an entirely new area. This time, I was in some kind of storage room. I could tell by the boxes piled up everywhere. They were overflowing with merchandise, all kinds of toys and apparel, everything I had to collect in the game. There must have been 10,000 points right in front of me, 100,000 even. I was ecstatic. I could satisfy my score immediately and focus my attention on finding the exit. I did not know if there was a point to scoring above 1,000, but I sure did love to see the numbers go up. I moved the character around the room, clicking the mouse on every box to find the contents inside. The room seemed like it was never ending. My score had skyrocketed to over 500,000 points before I noticed the first mannequin. It was facing away from me. Well, its body was anyway. The head was turned around slightly, and it had a hand in front of its lips, almost in a shh fashion. I tried to avoid the mannequin at all costs, not wanting to lose my record score, not knowing if the next time I played I would be in this room. However, it got to the point where its location was my only way forward. I started moving closer, and then I heard a sound that gave me goosebumps. It was the sound of someone saying, "Shh," very forcefully, as if the consequences of making any kind of noise were strictly forbidden. Let me explain that it was against computer lab rules to have the volume on. We would get in trouble if there were any sounds turned on in the games. I will swear on my mother's grave that my computer was on mute that day. The sound was loud. It was loud enough that anyone in the lab should have heard it. But all of my classmates continued their games like nothing had happened. The teacher did not even look up from her desk. I inched the character closer to the mannequin, and it suddenly whipped around at lightning speed, its whole body spinning like a top and facing me. The hand was still pressed to its mouth. Then I heard a great, booming voice that echoed off the classroom walls. "What did I tell you, Josh?" it shouted. I flinched. "Do you want to wake them up?" I immediately closed out of the game and pushed my chair away from the computer. Nobody around me seemed fazed by my reaction. I was terrified. I went home and went straight to my room, not bothering to even try the game again. I could not understand why I heard what I did, and for everyone else not to hear the loud mannequin yell. I was both scared that this cartoonish game had turned dark, but also frustrated that I had lost such a high score and made no progress at finding the exit. I did not play stud for several weeks. On computer lab day, I opted for number crunchers. I was nervous to try the game again, not knowing what I would find or what other scary things were in there. About a month later, I decided to suck it up and try it again. When I clicked the icon, another text box came up and read, "Welcome back, Josh. Where have you been?" I read the words for several minutes, trying to process how it still remembered me, and how it had a concept of my absence. I decided to ignore it, and I clicked play. I regret that decision to this very day. I began the game as normal. I was in the middle of the mall, surrounded by open shops on either side. I could see the collectibles floating and spinning across the floor, and the usual amount of silly mannequins patrolling around. I started picking up the items, doing my typical pattern of avoiding the outstretched arms and jumping over counters to access the higher scoring trinkets. Everything was going according to plan, until I left my last shop with 1,000 points and started towards the exit. The mannequin in the suit was already there. It had its arms crossed, or as best the mannequin could cross its arms. They were overlapped and stiff in an unusual way. There were no signs of a silly pose, or any indication that its appearance was friendly, as the game always was. The top hat was pulled down slightly over where its eyes would be, and I could make out the plastic shape of the mouth that had been curved into a frown. Then, it spoke to me. The voice was nowhere near as loud as the mannequin in the storage room. It was calm, almost soothing, but there was a tinge of disappointment in its tone. I began to feel scolded, as a parent would when they tried to give a light-hearted lecture. "Josh, you didn't go upstairs, did you?" I froze. My eyes flashed to the top of the escalator. I could make out the top of a mannequin's head overlooking the rail. Its plastic skull was all that was visible, peering down to me. Then I saw another, then another. There must have been hundreds of them, thousands, just the tops of their heads looking down at me in the mall like spectators at a stadium. I looked back at the suit and realized that it was slightly closer to me. "You woke them up, you little turd. You went upstairs. They heard your little feet stomping around. Then you were snooping around the storage area. You were told to be quiet, and you didn't listen." The mannequins on the second floor began to pour over the railings. The lifeless bodies rained down from above, piling up around me, landing in the fountain, crashing through the shop windows and shattering upon the ground. The sound was deafening. It sounded like the worst hailstorm ever. A pounding, thunderous noise. I looked around at the class, and no one had reacted. They were glued to their screens. I looked back at my own screen, and the suit was now inches from my character's point of view. Its plastic face was gleaming. It burned like the sun in front of me. And then, I looked at its mouth. The frown it had before was replaced with a terrible, black void. Rows of razor-sharp teeth engulfed the screen. And then, there was darkness. The game crashed. My computer screen went black. I faked a stomachache and was sent home. Several months went by. I finished the 4th grade and began a normal summer, spending most of my time outside and away from any electronics. Somehow, the game left my mind, a distant memory that faded into nothingness. Through my 5th grade year, I played Oregon Trail and bugged them like everyone else. Into middle school, I started getting into Minecraft, then eventually Call of Duty, and then the Fortnite craze. A few months ago, I got an email from one of my childhood friends. It was an invite to our 10th high school reunion. I RSVP'd and attended the get-together last night. It started out awkward. Old friends trying to make small talk and former relationships introducing spouses to each other. After a couple hours, and a lot of alcohol, everyone started to relax. A group of us took a bottle of wine and found a spot away from the party. We started sharing stories of our lives, and eventually started reminiscing about school. "Remember Oregon Trail?" Dave blurted out. "You have died of dysentery," he mocked. Everyone laughed and started throwing in phrases from the game. It was very nostalgic. It was overpowering. It made me remember. When it was quiet a little later, I chimed in with my own memory. "Hey, anyone remember Shop Till You Drop? That old Moore game with the mannequins?" I asked. Everyone looked at me, puzzled. They shook their heads. "You walk around collecting stuff?" I added. No one seemed to remember. I explained more about the game, and not a single person recognized it. I pulled out my phone and searched the title, but there were 0 results. It was like it never existed. "I think you've had one too many, bud," Dave said. We got up and made our way back to the party. I immediately noticed that the music had stopped. In fact, I couldn't hear anything. No voices, no laughs. I looked around. Instead of my high school class dancing and having fun, I saw hundreds of mannequins. Every single one of them was facing away from me. I turned to my group of friends, and they too were now lifeless statues. They were also not facing me, their clothes and appearances the same, but now stiff plastic instead of flesh. I started shaking in terror. A cold sweat broke out, and I felt every hair on my body stand on end. In the middle of the sea of mannequins, there was one facing the wrong direction. It had on a top hat. Its mouth was pulled downward into a frown. I could see its arm raised slightly above its head. A clenched fist instead of a thumb stuck out, pointing towards me. I looked into the direction of the thumb and saw a neon green exit sign above the door to the building's entrance. I looked back at the suit. "You never came back, Josh," it croaked, the voice of a tired old man. I took a step backward. "Don't you run. They'll get you. They always get you." I looked at my group of friends, and they were a little closer to me, their plastic arms slightly raised. "It's time to go shopping, Josh." At once, the mannequins disappeared. The room was replaced by a mall food court. I was in the middle of rows of tables, looking out into an empty shopping area where little trinkets floated above the ground. In the distance, I saw the same green exit sign. My phone battery is at 7%. I've collected over 1,000 points. I need to get to the exit, but I can feel them watching me. I can feel him watching me. I need someone to remember. Please, does anyone remember Stud? How do I win? How do I get out of here? Please. I'm an avid dreamer. I'm fascinated by the sleeping mind, and as such, I keep a dream journal to catalogue every thought that passes through my brain at night. I set at least one alarm every day so that I am able to wake up during REM sleep and recall my grandest dreams. Sometimes I just go back to sleep, but for the most part, I keep up with it. It's been an enlightening experience, and so far I filled a couple dozen notebooks. In addition to cataloguing my dreams, I also study the phenomenon. I've read almost every book on the subject and watched countless documentaries. I even took an elective back in high school called the dreaming mind. I was one of 7 kids in the class. In other words, most of my waking life is consumed by sleep in one form or another. One day, I visited the local author section of the town library in the hopes of finding a book on dreams that I hadn't read yet. This was the one section I'd never been in. I expected to find a bunch of self-published romance novels, and for the most part I did. But there was one non-fiction title that caught my eye. It was called Sleep Tactics: Exercises for a Mind at Rest by Jack Grovewood. The blurb on the back was vague and made it seem like a self-help book with quotes like, "Learn the secrets to a good night's rest," and "Feed your mind's insatiable appetite for better understanding." Not a book on dreams per se, but it did pique my interest. Delving into the book more at home, I found it to be more up my alley than I previously expected. It was filled with chapters pertaining to lucid dreaming, meditation, and even sleepwalking. I was already familiar with most of the content, but it turned out to be an enjoyable read. It wasn't until the last chapter, though, that I was taken completely off guard. I will outline most of it. Chapter 16: How to Exit Your Body. Disclaimer: this is not an OBE or out-of-body experience. As stated in Chapter 8, Out of Body, Out of Bed, I do believe in OBEs, but I find that they're just another form of dreaming. What I'm about to divulge to you is something completely different. It's neither an OBE nor a dream state. This is a way to truly exit your body using sleep paralysis as the catalyst. Before I discuss specifics, I'd like to go over a few prerequisites. In order to pull this off, you have to be proficient at lucid dreaming. What I mean by this is that you need to have lucid dreams on a regular basis and retain lucidity for long periods of time in these dreams. It also helps if you're able to manipulate your dream environment while lucid. If you only lucid dream on occasion, you'll have to practice and train your mind to do so more often. See Chapter 6, Becoming a Lucid Lucy. If you, however, are unable to lucid dream and or have never experienced one before, then this isn't for you. You will not be able to do it, I'm afraid. Another requirement is sleep paralysis. Most of us have experienced this in one time or another, but it will help immensely if you experience it regularly. Coupled with lucidity and a focused mind, sleep paralysis is your only way out of your own skin, so to speak. That's all you need in the way of mental capabilities, more or less. It's an added bonus if you have an OBE or have ever had a wake-initiated lucid dream. See Chapter 7, Wake Unto Sleep. Now onto the fun part. I'm going to lay this out in a step-by-step fashion, followed by a more detailed explanation of what to expect upon achieving your first departure. Keep in mind, results may vary. Step 1. Fall asleep on your back in a slanted position. It could be on a recliner or a car seat, but your body has to be diagonal relative to the ground. That's the only way I've been able to get this to work. For one reason or another, gravity plays a role. Step 2. Attain sleep paralysis. This is more of a waiting game than a step, as you can't really execute this at will. You'll just have to keep trying until it happens. When it does, lucidity is key. You have to be aware that you're in a state of sleep paralysis and be unafraid of your lack of mobility. This is one of the ways being a lucid dreamer comes in handy. Step 3. Once paralyzed, attempt to move your legs. If you're in the proper position, at least one of them should be mobile. If you can't move either of them, then you'll have to start over and experiment by tilting your seat in different positions. Step 4. Upon freeing one or more of your legs, attempt to free your arms. They should feel incredibly stiff and heavy, and you shouldn't be able to move them, try as you might. You should, however, feel a sharp sting in your head. Don't be alarmed, you're not having an aneurysm. This is completely normal and is necessary to making your exit. Step 5. As difficult and strenuous as it may be, keep trying to move your arms. As you do this, attempt to move the rest of your body as well. Put everything you have into fighting the paralysis. Just don't fall back asleep. Step 6. As you wrestle with your mind and body, the stinging sensation in your head is going to get exponentially worse. It won't cause you pain, but it will create a great discomfort. Let it happen. As the sensation in your brain builds, you'll start to feel yourself drift away from your body. Don't fight it. Your mind is like a rubber band, and it will bounce back from where it's being stretched. Don't let it. Follow the flow of departure. If you steal your mind's focus and follow these instructions to a T, you will have successfully exited your earthly meat sack and unlocked a marvel of the mind that has only just begun to be understood. And that's the gist of it. The author went on to say that the world you find yourself in upon departure will harbour some differences to the one you started in. It will appear similar in almost every way. However, there will be no people. None at all. On top of that, nothing will budge. Everything remains in its place, as still as can be. After explaining how to re-enter one's body, the author ended the chapter with an eerie warning. Whatever you do, don't go near the water. Needless to say, I was dumbfounded. The entire book up to that point was factual, but that last chapter seemed like something right out of a science fiction novel. It certainly made for an interesting read, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Why have such an out-of-place pseudoscience chapter in an otherwise reputable book? It didn't make any sense. About a week passed before I thought about the book again. It was just about time to return it to the library, so I decided to reread it, namely the last chapter. As absurd as it seemed, I teetered between laughing it off once and for all and actually giving it a shot. I did meet all of the requirements, and it would amuse me to some small extent. I could, at the very least, say that I tried it out. After much private deliberation, I decided, why the hell not? I knew it wasn't going to work, but part of me thought that maybe something would happen. Plus, was there really anything better for me to do during an episode of sleep paralysis? The only minor nuisance was that I'd have to sleep on one of my recliners instead of the comfort of my king-size Serta mattress. But it'll only be one night. I slept on worse things before. Long story short, I had 3 episodes of sleep paralysis on the night in question. First one, I was too groggy, completely forgot about the book, and quickly fell back to sleep. Second one lasted a bit longer, and I remembered to try the method. I could just barely move one of my legs, and upon trying the arms, I did feel a small but noticeable discomfort in my head. I wondered for a second if the method was really leading to something, and then became a bit excited over it. Because of this, I woke up. Reflecting on what had happened, I became intrigued. I still didn't believe that I could exit my body, but I knew something was going on. I decided to tilt the recliner back a bit and try again. This time, I would have better control. Next episode came pretty quick. I hadn't fallen asleep yet, but my body was getting ready to. This is it, I thought. I allowed the paralysis to fully set in before attempting anything. It was difficult not to fall asleep, but I managed. This time around, I was able to gain full control over my leg. I moved it back and forth a bit before trying to free my arms. True to the method, they wouldn't budge and felt oddly stiff, more so than usual. This is when the familiar sting set in. It jarred me, but I kept going. The more I tried to move my arms, the greater the sting grew. Believe it or not, as I continued, I did in fact feel myself drifting away from my body. I tried to keep it up, but my nerves got the best of me. I lost all control for just a moment and jolted right back into my body, immediately waking up in the process. This experience startled me. It was beginning to seem more and more likely that the last chapter of the book was somehow accurate. My curiosity became aroused to such an extent that I had to tell someone about it. Luckily, I knew just the person. My buddy Josh is a character. He believes in a lot of what I don't. Because of this, we butt heads on a lot of topics. In simple terms, I'm a skeptic and he's a believer. One thing we both share a love for, however, is dreams. He's the only person I can talk to at length about the subject. He also happens to meet the same requirements for departure. I was hoping he could join me in a sleep session and help me get to the bottom of what was happening. I called Josh up and told him everything. He was ecstatic, as I knew he would be. He agreed to meet me the following night at my place for departure. In his mind, this was definitely going to work, but I was still wary. In any case, I was happy to have someone else to tag along for the ride. Fast forward to the following night. We hang out for a bit, and I show Josh the book. His eyes grow wide upon reading the final chapter, and he can't wait to try it out for himself. I told him not to get his hopes up, but it was clear to me that they already were. We laid down at opposite ends of my living room on my two recliners. Josh cracked a joke about how this was the first time we'd be sleeping together. I threw a pillow at him, and then we were off. Shut-eye was right around the corner. This is when things get weird. I didn't have an episode of sleep paralysis right away, but I did end up waking up a few hours into my nap. I noticed that Josh was fast asleep in the recliner across the room. Having to empty my bladder, I walked past him to get to the bathroom, tripping over his leg in the process. I met the floor with a thud and turned around to see if Josh had woken. He hadn't. I knew he was a heavy sleeper, but he should have woken up given the commotion. Worried, I yelled his name. Nothing. I tried shaking him. Still nothing. I grabbed a wrist and checked his pulse. It was there, but it was weak. This is when I panicked. I ran to my room, grabbed my phone, and scrambled to hit the call button. Just as I was about to dial 911, I heard a loud gasp from the next room, like a diver coming up for air. I ran out to the living room, and to my delight, Josh was awake. He looked up at me with wide eyes and said, "Dude, it worked!" I was flabbergasted. Though Josh was an over-enthusiastic believer and downright stubborn at times, he was no liar. I asked him over and over again if he was sure it wasn't just a dream, and he said he was 100% certain. I believed him. Why else would I have not been able to wake him? Why else would his pulse have been so weak? We spent the next couple of hours talking about the experience. Josh told me the author was right. Upon leaving his body, he found himself in the world around him, only everything was perfectly still. He tried opening the door to my house, but the knob wouldn't turn and the door wouldn't budge. It took him a while to realize this, but he ended up discovering that he could phase through the walls. This is one of the reasons that caused me to think it might have been a dream. Josh went on to tell me that world looked different as well. He said it was like having the contrast dialed up on a picture. Combined with the eerie stillness, he said it was truly like being stuck in a photograph. I tried to imagine it. I knew I needed to see it for myself. We made plans to go to sleep and enter the world together. Though I was anxious, I felt confident that I could pull it off this time. And I did. I made my first successful departure that night and found Josh waiting in the room for me next to his sleeping body. While seeing ourselves sleeping was fascinating in itself, I wanted more than anything to see the world outside. For a few weeks, Josh slept over at my house, and we explored the new world. It was fun and downright addicting. Curiosity was what kept us going. We wanted to know more about the odd realm we'd found ourselves in. Here are just a few things we learned. The lighting is fixed. It always looks to be about noontime, though there is no sun in the sky. We can't phase through older buildings. Not sure why. There's no people like the book said, but also no animals or even insects. Sound is reverbed. There's always a slight echo when Josh and I talk. It's possible to fall asleep in the world, but you won't dream. If you travel too far from your body, you'll hit an invisible wall and be unable to go any further. Time doesn't pass in the real world while we're departed. After about a month of exploring, things changed. The more and more we explored, the more uncomfortable I felt. It always seemed like something had its eye on us, even though there was no one around. Josh was the opposite. Our late-night adventures were becoming so routine for him that he was becoming bored. He kept talking about the water and how he wanted to get a closer look at the pond near the main road. I kept reminding him about the author's warning, but Josh didn't seem to care. Water was the one thing we hadn't toyed around with yet. Eventually, Josh's curiosity got the best of him. One night, upon leaving my body, Josh was nowhere to be found. I thought that maybe he hadn't departed yet, but he always beat me to the punch. This could only mean one thing. I phased through the walls of my home and raced to the nearby pond. Josh was there. He was standing at the end of the dock that the locals would fish off of. I yelled out to him. "Josh, what are you doing?" "It's fine, see? There's nothing to be afraid of. It's just water." I watched as Josh reached down and touched the surface of the pond. It rippled. This struck me as incredibly bizarre. It shouldn't have reacted to his touch. We'd been there for weeks and hadn't seen a single thing move. Even the air was still. Perplexed, I started walking out towards Josh. He lifted his hand up, just as awestruck as I was. As he pulled his arm back, the ripple expanded. With it, a small portion of the water turned black. After a few moments, I watched as something reached out from the blackness. It was a hand. A damn hand. It reached up over the dock and grabbed Josh's leg, yanking him downward. He went feet first into the water, holding onto the dock for dear life. As he screamed, I ran towards him as fast as I could. Before I could even get halfway to his position, I watched him disappear into the water. I ran the rest of the way, but the blackness had faded and returned to normal. My best friend was gone. Breathless and in shock, I ran away. I wanted to save Josh, but I didn't know how. I also felt that if I re-entered my body, perhaps I'd find Josh awake in the real world. It was wishful thinking, but it was all I had. That wishful thinking fell flat when I awoke. Josh was still unconscious. I tried and tried, but I couldn't get him to wake up. Eventually, I called 911 and he was taken away on a stretcher. The doctors say he's in a coma, but can't discern what caused it. And that's everything. I'm a wreck over what happened. I tried visiting Josh in the hospital, but I can't face his parents, and they're always there. Instead, I go out to the pond in the real world, hoping that somehow I'll find answers. All I do end up finding are more questions. I haven't even departed since Josh was taken. I've tried, but something's holding me back. Might be fear. Josh's analogy was right. That world is like a photograph, a still frame of the world we were never meant to see. A moment frozen in time with a layer of reality stripped away. And there's something living there. Despite this, I need to save my friend. He didn't heed the author's warning, but I'm the reason he entered that world in the first place. I have to go back. So my roommate, let's call him Sean, left school before the semester ended, and I thought this was rather strange, so I rummaged through some of his stuff and found a notebook. What I read was shocking. Here's what the notebook read. I've replaced names for privacy reasons. Well, I've never really written a diary or anything before, so I don't really know what I'm doing. But here goes nothing. Night 1. The concert was good, I guess. I'm not really into screamo that much, but Jack was good on guitar. So my girlfriend Rachel and I were taking everybody home. We came close to Rick's house, and we saw a bright orange light up the night sky, and smoke rising into the heavens. It was an extremely large amount of light and smoke, so naturally, we went to check it out. We thought a house was on fire. That's how large it was. It was strange because there was no road that led directly to where the fire was. So we parked the truck on the closest street and proceeded on foot. As we got closer to the fire, we started to hear chanting. We couldn't tell what the chanting was saying, but it was deep and loud. I'm not sure why I got as close as I did. Maybe to impress Rachel. But the point is, I got close. Too close. Every person chanting was surrounding the fire in a large circle, and they all appeared to be wearing the same robes, like monks. Anyway, I was at least less than 100 feet away from them. I held my phone up so that I could take a picture. But before I could take the photo, one of the men saw me, and in an instant, all of them were glaring at me, their hoods darkening their faces. Instinctively, I took off running and ran back to the truck and yelled, drive!" Immediately, Rachel floored it and we took off. They asked me what happened, and I told them that I thought they saw me. It was quite a scare, but I wasn't too worried. It's not like they know where I live. I went home that night, and at about 1 in the morning, I decided to hit the hay. This is when it began. I had a terrible nightmare. It wasn't anything gruesome or disgusting. It was just shocking. All it was someone in a cloak, like the ones I saw on the people by the fire. What I saw was this man in the cloak. All he did was stand there and stare. I couldn't make out any of the features of his face, just his eyes. They were pitch black, piercing, like they were staring straight into my soul. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Night 2. I had the same dream as last night. It was just longer this time. I felt like I wanted to wake up, but couldn't. It was like the man had trapped me. Night 3. I don't want to sleep tonight. I can't stand to have that dream again. I've been looking over my shoulder all day. I'll just drink some Red Bull and watch a marathon of Top Gear. Day 4. I might be going crazy, or maybe it's the lack of sleep, but I could have sworn I saw the cloaked man out of my chemistry window. Night 4. I tried to stay awake again tonight, but I couldn't. The lack of sleep got to me and I passed out. The dream was worse than ever. Same dream, same cloaked man. Just this time, there was a high-pitched squeak going on the whole time, and every once in a while, a deep laugh would arise, then fall as quickly as it had come. I can't take much more of this, and Luke is no help, since he's home for the long weekend. Night 5. I decided to have Rachel stay with me tonight. I don't want to face this alone. Once again, same dream, same man, same high-pitched squeak. Except this time, the laugh was louder and more frequent. I feel like this is some Freddy Krueger crap. Day 6. I saw him again. He was in the damn reflection of my bathroom mirror. I looked behind me and he wasn't there. God, I don't know how much of this I can take. Night 6. Luke's back, and I told him what had been happening, and he told me to just relax, that I'm overreacting. He's probably right. But why can't I shake this nightmare? Day 7. I saw him again today. He was across the street from me, just glaring. I know he was there because I stared back at him for a good 20 seconds. I think they're after me. They're gonna kill me. Night 7. I actually didn't have the dream tonight. It was worse. I awoke with a jolt in the middle of the night. I can't remember why, but what I saw nearly gave me a heart attack. I glanced at the window, and there, standing in the window, was the cloaked man. I looked away in fright, and when I looked back, he was gone. I have to get out of here. I'm going home. I can't stay here anymore. Day 8. I packed the majority of my things. I'll leave the dresser here for Luke, give him more space. I hope that maybe this trip back home will fix me. I think I just need to get away. Night 8. Luke invited me to a party tonight. but I told him I was too tired and I was going to get some sleep. I wish I went to that party. Luke stayed out all night, so it was another night alone. The dream came back, and it was just as bad as before. Like last night, I woke up in the middle of the night and looked out the window. Thankfully, there was nobody there. I jolted in fright when there was a hard, frequent, and frantic knocking on my door. I looked through the peer hole, and I saw Rachel, knocking and banging and screaming for me to help. I opened the door, and he was standing there. I was paralyzed with fright. Sorry if this seems really descriptive, but I will never forget that image in my head. He glared at me with his dark, piercing eyes for what seemed like an eternity. Then, in an instant, he released a horrible, blood-curdling scream and lunged at me, and then I blacked out. I woke up on the floor of my dorm room with the door wide open and a crowd gathered around me. And go figure, there he was, in the back of the crowd, glaring at me. Screw this. I'm grabbing my things and leaving for home. Screw this. I just can't take it anymore. That is the end of the notebook. This is Luke speaking again, and after I read this over a couple of times, I decided to do some research on this cult. I found nothing. But what I can tell you is what has happened since the incident, and what I've determined. Well, Rachel went back home as well. I guess she's not with Sean anymore. But there is a good reason for that. Sean never made it back home. For some godforsaken reason, he jumped in front of a moving train and killed himself the night he was supposed to get back home. I think his plan of escaping the cloaked man didn't work, and he just couldn't take it anymore. Here's what I've determined on the whole situation. There was no cult. I talked to Rachel and the others about the fire, and they said that it wasn't chanting that they heard, it was singing. And they also said they didn't get close enough to tell, but they said they couldn't see anyone around the fire. So I think that they were all figments of Sean's imagination. Maybe something happened to him in his childhood that sparked his mind to think up this disturbing cult. I'm not the best at research, so maybe I missed some key information about this cult. Any information you might have on this cult will be greatly appreciated. And on a side note, I'm pretty sure I saw the cloaked man in the hallway while I was getting a drink. Maybe Sean's notebook is getting to me. Being a single 38-year-old father of a 13-year-old is quite the challenge, but my son, Jared, has made it far too easy for me. He was the poster child of a good child. He never got into any trouble, excelled in every subject in school, and had a passion for the classical guitar. Of course, just like any other kid, he would do something wrong, but he was always honest with me. He would tell me what he did, and he would always seem legitimately sorry for his actions. That is why I was browsing through Craigslist looking for an Xbox One. I knew he wanted one, but it was far too expensive for me to buy. I could barely keep up with the bills, but I checked for a decent deal every night before I went to bed. "4 days ago, I came across a new ad placed for an Xbox One with 4 games for just $75. When I clicked on the ad, I saw that an enraged mother was selling her son's game system because he failed in all of his classes. After checking the time and seeing that it was 8:30 p.m, I called the number that was on the bottom of the post. 10 minutes later, we agreed to meet at my house at 10 a.m. the next day to make the transaction. Before she hung up the phone, she said, "I just want you to know something. My son, he's a smart kid, and he is a really good boy, but ever since he got that stupid system, he started getting obsessed over a game. I don't really know which one, but just monitor your son." I hung up the phone with an uneasy feeling, but I knew that my son was different. He deserved it. When my son came home from school, he screamed out in joy when he saw me hooking up his new Xbox to the TV. He ran up and gave me a hug and sat right next to me while I connected the HDMI cable to the system. I handed the controller to Jared and he started looking through the games. Once he picked out some sort of car racing game, I got up and started getting dinner ready. By the time I put together the last chicken taco, I turned around to call out to Jared to come in, but I saw he was already sitting on his chair. The whole entire meal, Jared thanked me for getting him the Xbox and about how his first couple races went. When we finished dinner, he got up and walked into his room. After I cleared out the dishes and washed them, I walked upstairs to my room. And when I passed by his room, I checked in and saw that he was closing up his school notebook and picking up his guitar. I had to get up early for a meeting the next morning, so I fell asleep as soon as I walked into the room to the sound of my son strumming out for Elise. The next couple of days went by smoothly. My son would come home, play on the Xbox for about an hour or two, eat dinner with me, and then do his homework and practice his guitar before going to bed. 2 days ago, everything changed. My son looked through his games, but after a couple of seconds, he started going through the menu of the Xbox. I told myself to make sure I had some new games before next week. I made chicken soup that night, but when I was done making it, my son was not sitting in front of the dinner table like he always was. After I called out to him about 3 times without a response, I walked out of the kitchen and into the living room. He was completely fixated on a game I hadn't seen him play before. It was just a yellow ball on the far right corner of the screen. There were smaller, grey balls flying towards the yellow ball that I guess you try to avoid. I tapped on Jared's shoulder, but he ignored me and kept playing the game. He never did this before, so I just took his dinner out to the living room and placed it next to him. I told him to eat it whenever he felt like it. I never really worried about him. He always did the right thing. The next day was Saturday too, so I decided to let him play the game for as long as he wanted. After I finished my dinner, I gave Jared a kiss on the forehead and walked to my room. I was used to falling asleep to the sound of his music, but the fast-paced rhythmic tapping on his controller slowly guided me to sleep. I woke up at 5 a.m. yesterday morning. The first thing I noticed was that I could still hear the sound of tapping. The second thing I noticed was that the tapping was completely in rhythm. Not a single tap was out of the beat that filled the otherwise silent house. I got out of bed and walked downstairs. Jared was still sitting in front of the TV. I tapped him several times, but he did not take his eyes off of the screen. I looked him in the eyes to get his attention, but the glazed look in his eyes made me start to panic. His eyes were a solid green. It wasn't the lighting or anything on the screen. His eyes were solid green. Without any hesitation, I grabbed the controller out of his hands and started to drag him to his room. He screamed and tried to get out of my grip, but I didn't loosen my grip until he was in his room. Through his tears and his screaming, he crawled to his bed and fell asleep. Curious, I went downstairs and picked up the controller